Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome to the second of the House Bill 2415 Electronic Processes Rulemaking Advisory Committees. My name is Tyler Glaze, and I'm a policy analyst with the Building Codes Division. And with me to help out with these proceedings is Selena Patterson. She's the head of our e-permitting team. And Selena, if you'd mind introducing yourself.
Sure. Hi there. Afternoon, everybody.
Thank you so much. And we also have Laura Burns here with us to help us run this meeting. Laura, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, my name is Laura Burns, and I help with coordinating all of the public meetings.
Thank you so much. All right, so if you would all look to your agendas, we have a couple items up for discussion today, but to get things started off, Selena is going to lead us in a discussion of the survey that was discussed at the last Rulemaking Advisory Committee that we sent out to local jurisdictions to assess their electronic capabilities. And we are going to go through those with me sharing the screen so everyone can see along with us. And Selena is going to take that over.
Righty. Let's see if we can. All right, so first off, thank you very much to OBOA and ICC for the help in kind of getting jurisdictions to respond to the survey. I think we had a pretty good rate of response with 99 of the 130 jurisdictions in Oregon that have building departments answering what were a good number of questions. So definitely appreciate the effort that was put in and the help in getting those responses back. We did have some that didn't respond, so I think there are 31 jurisdictions, and looking at the list that's there, I actually know that about half of those jurisdictions are actually on state e-permitting, so we do have a kind of a sense of at least, you know, what kind of technology they're using, if not all of the answers to some of the more specific questions, which would have been helpful to have. But still, all in all, I think we had a very good rate of participation. So let's move on to the talking about our first section, which is the plan review questions and the general topic of plan review. So it looks like, you know, most jurisdictions, so of the respondents, about 3/4 of our jurisdictions are accepting electronic plans, which I think was pretty good news that there's such a high number of folks who are accepting plans, and they're accepting them. Looks like, just informationally, most of them, email was our #1 way of getting plans from folks, and then another, you know, the second is online. And there were quite a few people who said other, and I'm not quite sure what that means, if that's, you know, accepting a thumb drive or exactly what other ways folks are getting plans. But again, it looks like mostly people are having them loaded online or emailed into the office. And PDF, no surprise, is the #1 way that people are accepting. It looks like most jurisdictions, or a good number of jurisdictions, are only accepting PDFs. And then there's a smaller percentage that will also accept CAD, and then basically anything else that they can convert and are able to open in plan review. So, but here's probably the most, you know, for this group, the most important part of this portion of the survey is kind of looking at, you know, for those folks who don't accept electronic plans or who are doing electronic plan review, kind of what are those barriers and what is the difficulty in the process. And it looks like from the answers, money and costs, whether those were staffing costs or actually economic costs, that was one of the barriers that jurisdictions mentioned as the reason that they were not able to kind of jump in and do electronic plan review. or equipment. Some of them were also talking about hardware, whether it was for having, big enough monitors or enough monitors to be able to review those plans, or a lot of folks were also talking about printing their plans. And again, I think that would be a useful place as we explore this to kind of get a sense from jurisdictions who are doing a lot of plan review, how much do they actually print it? What types of equipment are necessary as something that, might be helpful for some of these jurisdictions who are contemplating whether they can or cannot do electronic plan review, to get a better idea of what what their bare bones minimum is for the things that they would need. And then some of the other, concerns were kind of, difficulty of actually doing the reviews on a screen, and feeling that they couldn't see enough information or get enough information, or that was going to be a challenge to be able to figure that out. And again, I think that's a place where that may be something that jurisdictions who are doing a lot of plan review may be able to help kind of provide some best practices that might help folks with kind of overcoming some of the problems. And then I know from folks on e-permitting who have been trying to, we have the electronic plan review tools available for people, but often part of the process is figuring out, what that is going to look like as a business process. How are the handoffs between departments going to happen? How do you communicate to your customers? It seems like that is also kind of one of the barriers to some of the folks doing electronic plan review, is figuring out those processes and what's going to work out for people the best. And I don't know if anybody on the committee has anything to kind of add to that, or any comments on kind of some of the information that was presented from jurisdictions about electronic plan review. No, okay.
Actually, sorry, Selena.
Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding the cost, has the division thought about making it clear, I guess, whether a technology fee would be considered to be consistent or inconsistent with the state fee methodology rules?
You can adopt a technology fee as part of your, for jurisdictions. The only caveat to that is that it has to be across the board. So you apply it to all, it's a percentage-based fee, and you generally apply it across the board to all of your permit types. So it's not, you can't, use it just for one subset of permits and not for other sets of permits, if that makes sense.
I think so. Is across the board, across the building inspection program administration, or across planning, and public works, and
across the building department.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other thoughts or questions about the electronic plan review portion of the survey?
I was just going to add that, the cost is definitely an issue, especially for a lot of jurisdictions, depending on what they're doing. So as we're coming up with the rules, we want to be really flexible. We went from a very proprietary, expensive program to, basically using a PDF editor. And from our customers' perspective, they really don't see that much of a difference. So as long as we can set up this so there's flexibility in what the jurisdiction can actually do from a software perspective, because again, that proprietary thing was hundreds of thousands of dollars versus, something that cost me $600 for a license, perpetual license going forward type thing.
So that's in terms of that change from using a very developed and expensive program to doing what is more like a markup. How did that work in terms of like customer communication and like setting up the process of, different reviewers? Was that a difficult transition to make?
It wasn't difficult for us. We do use Acela, but we are self-hosted, so we had a lot more flexibility than the state model currently has. But again, since we're writing the rules for this, maybe the state model adjusts so people have some of that built into the system for themselves. But we leverage Acela and ACA for all of our communication for the customers now. So all the plan review letters go out through Communication Manager, get sent to the customer. That way it retains itself within the database. They can look at it. We actually expanded all of our record statuses so that way it's very clear where every step of the process is. So if we're waiting on fees due, that's actually what the record status says, is fees due. So that way the customer knows on their dashboard really quickly, this is what's happening. If there is a plan review letter, if there's a completeness review letter, those different steps, we actually added all of those statuses in there to communicate with the customer in addition to our outreach through email through Communication Manager.
Gotcha. Okay. Anybody else have any experiences to share about implementing electronic plan review, either successes or things that they found to be real challenges for their jurisdiction or as customers?
This is Bill Clemens, Douglas County. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm at home, so I'm winging it here. Yeah, we're just now upgrading to a new permit tracking software called iWorks that has, a package plan review module to it. And so we're not really sure, they're promising us, a workable package, but we're not really sure what it's going to look like yet. So I'm with Jonathan on keeping it flexible. So.
Absolutely understandable. I think we need to figure out ways that this can work for everybody, and for the customers to have it be as simple to interact with the systems as possible. So, anybody else have any thoughts or?
I just have a couple of comments. We in Clackamas County went from 100% paper to kind of our own form of we use Acela as our permitting platform. We kind of made up our own plan review system when COVID kicked in, and then we recently moved to Project Docs. And all of them have their advantages and disadvantages. And I think that looking at that and what meets the jurisdictions from a large jurisdiction to a smaller jurisdiction, really it's going to vary from size to size. So I think that's something, we need to look at, especially when you're going over to rural Eastern Oregon, versus city of Portland or Clackamas County. It's a big difference. So.
Yeah, as it makes a difference on the size of the project in terms of like how much communication is going to be going back and forth, like the needs for tracking the review and all of the comments on a huge project versus a more streamlined residential project are really different. And so do you build the system to accommodate both of those things or one of those things, or, how do you deal with that kind of variability in terms of what you may have coming through the door?
Right. And I think that, each jurisdiction, their populations are different too, where you have people who are more computer savvy in the more urban areas. Not that they're not always savvy in the rural, but I think you have more people who may not like the the digital applications and everything. We've experienced that just in Clackamas County alone, where we've had a lot of people that are like, we don't do that. We don't want to do that. So trying to meet them in the middle is sometimes difficult, but I think important.
And Matt, with your plan review process, do you have all of your departments participating in the electronic review of those plans, or is it just the building department?
No, we have planning, engineering, and then also outside entities such as the different sewer districts and fire districts that are within the county.
And in terms of like building the consensus to be able to have everybody do that, was that kind of like how did that get driven to get everybody included in your process for reviews?
We reached out to everybody and just, a lot of communication and, trying to get people on board and helping them to understand, kind of where we're moving to. So.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have comments or experiences to share with the group? Oh, okay, all righty. Well, let's move on to a little further down here. So this kind of goes with the plan review. It's just more about, are people actually marking up the plans electronically? Pretty consistent in terms of the numbers. If you're doing plan review, you're marking it up electronically. If you're accepting the plans, most people are. And then we have kind of, what technology or what software are people using to do the markup. It looks like Bluebeam is probably the number one there. And then some jurisdictions are using multiple products. It looks like Bluebeam and Acrobat, Energov and Bluebeam, some Acrobat project docs we've heard mentioned a couple of times, and DigiPlan. So a couple of different varieties with Bluebeam being one of the larger ones. Although again, I know e-permitting, that is the primary resource that we offer with e-permitting currently is Bluebeam. So we have a lot of folks doing that. Alrighty. And again, a good number of departments have other departments doing electronic reviews of the documents. And primarily it looks like we have participation from planning, fire, public works, engineering, utilities, as well as a smattering of other departments. And again, there is that kind of, I know from our experience working with different jurisdictions, sometimes that can be a challenge to get all of your departments at a city or at a county to participate in, coming into whatever electronic system you're using and doing the sign-offs. But generally with kind of, just as Matt said, with a lot of communication and discussion, people seem to be able to get everybody on board as long as the process is simple and straightforward enough for folks. And then in terms of communicating with customers electronically, it looks like almost everybody is communicating with their customers about the status of the plans. And mostly people are doing that via email as the number one way of doing things. And then some people are also communicating online or through just the website by posting the status. And this was one of those places where we asked if there were any barriers to communicating with the customers. And it seems like for some folks, either their customers or they themselves prefer to talk to people, and again, that may be kind of like Matt was saying, some people are definitely resistant or don't want to do things electronically, and they want to have that personal relationship. And certainly, there's certainly a place for keeping those, in our businesses. So, alrighty, but that was primarily. So that was kind of the plan review section of this survey. Any comments or thoughts before we move on to kind of talking about the permitting section of the survey? Nope. All right, let's move on to the permitting. Okay, so we asked how many jurisdictions had electronic databases. It looks like almost everybody, most people have, or most jurisdictions are using some kind of electronic database for tracking their permit data. The few that were not said that they were kind of not in the process of pursuing that. They were continuing along with what they were using. Of the folks who do have permit databases, most of them have databases that are searchable by the public, although, now we're getting back kind of like the split that we had with the electronic plan review, about 75% versus 25% in terms of having public access. And then for those jurisdictions that do allow people to search their database or have that available online for folks, more people did not make people or have people register for their systems, but then some people did. So that was like a third of the jurisdictions did require people to register before they could search for information. And then the others had things fully open where they could just come in and search for information. And so the type of information that folks had that people could search, permit data, inspection data, pretty much most jurisdictions had that did have this available, offered that. And then it was a smaller percentage, about half of those, who allowed folks to search for plans and other documents. And I know that this is, I know from our experience in e-permitting that there's jurisdictions have very different philosophies about, and we actually kind of did some calling around nationally just to get a sense of different cities and counties, you know, how many jurisdictions allow folks to just come in and open plans without being even like associated. We do have jurisdictions across the country, some larger jurisdictions and cities that just have their documents out there, even plans, and allow people to come look at them and are not so concerned. I guess that they're not as concerned about copyright as other places are. Probably more places currently lock down plans, so that you either have to sign in and register to be able to look at them, or you have to have been associated with the submittal of those plans in order to be able to look at them. But I was curious at this juncture if people, in terms of, you know, both having registered users and unregistered users, if anybody on this committee has had any problems with people accessing the data online, or just any insights about that issue of making plans available online, and who you make them available to.
So for us, we ended up looking at this two different ways. Our IT department is asking to set it up so at least on Acella's side of the world, once it gets over to Laserfish, that'll be different. But on Acella's side of the world, that it has to be somebody that is associated with the records, the ideal situation, but no matter what, at least somebody that's a registered user, to keep people from disseminating bad information before we have a chance to glean it from a counter perspective. So I guess there is a decent concern with having the ability to basically upload something, copy the URL really quickly, and then send it out around the world to from an IT threat perspective. So they're a little concerned with that. So that was one of the elements that we had to walk through. Once it's on Laserfish, it's different because then it's our information that we're giving out instead of them being able to upload. So we walked through that one, but we don't really have a lot of struggle with that side of the world. The part we learned quickly was it's hard to limit it to the person associated with the record unless you want to spend a lot of time with on the permit tech side reassociating public user accounts with an actual record or company, because everybody under the sun has a different one and the system doesn't automatically associate and those sorts of things. So it became a quick challenge to us having to back it down to just a registered user. Anybody can look at it, and then the way we chose to do it was filter out what documents can be seen by what stage the permit was in instead. So once we accept it basically as a complete submittal, the system's going to not allow people to see those documents. They'll be no longer viewable on ACA until we have reviewed plans approved. Then they'll be available again on ACA. So that's how we chose to do it instead.
Anybody else have any experience, problems?
Oh, and Eugene, this is interesting. One of the things where the 130 jurisdictions all grapple with the same thing and figured out on themselves. We have basic permit information available online. Anybody can freely go online and search by address or permit number if they know it and find basic information about individual permits. Beyond that, other public records, including the plans, they have to fill out a request form. And then if they're asking for documents, then we have them sign a copyright release. And then we've got a process to make documents available digitally to the folks that requested them. That Joel, on the meeting here as well, can probably expand on that.
Mark, I had a question on that. Did you do that on the basis of your like city attorney's advice, or was more just a feeling of how you, as a building department, how you wanted to approach releasing those?
It was mostly an internal discussion that we then ran by the attorney in terms of, is our approach okay? Because we had the discussion that covered the whole spectrum of, do we just make everything freely available and viewable to everybody, or do we really lock it down? And we landed in, a middle ground that that our attorney said was valid. And our process, I don't know if anybody here's from the city of Portland, but our copyright release form and process, I think, is real similar to what Portland does.
Yes, Lisa Gill from City of Portland. That is exactly it. Exactly what Eugene is doing is what Portland's doing.
Love your background, Lisa.
Yes, go Ducks.
So Lisa, so people can search for basic permit information through the Portland website, but not access plans unless they put in a special request for them, and then they have to sign the forms before they can get digital access to plans. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Just for the record, Douglas County does the same thing.
So again, people can search for, well, this is great to know. So there's a kind of, you can search for information, but anything. What about other types of documents? So besides, is this only for plans? With it, Mark, Lisa, Douglas?
It's for everything. They put in an information request that's vetted through our county attorney. All the requests come through our county attorney information specialist person, comes to the building department, and we release the information. Gotcha. So, yeah.
Anybody else?
But as far as online, we have our website, and that's why we're upgrading. But a person can search a permit record, a building permit record, an inspection record online with at any time. It's just the plans or, official, official information that would go through the attorney's office. Okay. So.
Anybody else doing anything different?
I was going to add that for Eugene, one of the questions was about problems that you've had. And we have had some problems with the data that we make available to everybody being sort of mass attempts to mass download that data, sort of cycling through log numbers. And we've had some problems with that, and we've implemented some things to try and prevent that, but that's something to be aware of when you do make things publicly available.
Can you tell what they're trying to glean off of the website?
Well, what we make available is basically what amounts to a standard report of the information about the permit along with inspection data. So they would just be trying to get all of that data, presumably. I don't know what they would attempt to do with it, but they're just sort of trying to download every permit number, basically.
Which, yeah, I mean, I know that sometimes people want to get marketing stuff up, and that's one reason I know we don't put any like personal email or phone number in any of the contacts that we post up on e-permitting. We'll put a contractor's phone number because it's a business phone, but not personal phone numbers. But yeah, that definitely, and as security and hackers get more and more creative and difficult, it's definitely something we all need to keep an eye on, that type of data gleaning. Anybody else have difficult or, problems or other things that they do as a jurisdiction and around this issue?
I was just going to add that we also have the app. It's similar to the state scheduling app where you can go on and look at permit history and everything, which we found really helpful for Clackamas County. Primarily, people are using that to do their scheduling and look up, inspection notes and stuff like that. Yeah. And then other than that, we're very similar to Eugene and Portland in that, permit data is basic stuff is pretty available. Inspection data is available. And then if they want plans, they have to do a formal records request. So if they're not the owners of the plans, so.
Gotcha. Anybody have any other experience or do anything a little bit differently? Nope. Alrighty, let's move on then to the next section, Tyler. Let's see, we kind of discussed, nope, here we are, is there are some questions about online application. So it looks like most jurisdictions who have electronic databases do have online applications. And of those who do have the online applications, most jurisdictions allow customers to apply for most types of building permits, and then a few are only allowing the trade permits to be applied for. Let's move on. And then those folks who are not, do not have currently allow or have the ability to have customers apply online, we asked whether people were considering it. Some people are, a few people are not. And then of those who do have online processing, most people, most jurisdictions have their customers able to pay for those permits online. And also to be able to upload documents or plans to their online permits. So and they can see the status, most people can see the status. So it looks like for those jurisdictions that do have electronic databases, there's a fair amount of consistency in terms of the features that are available. People can pretty much pay online, see the status of their permit, upload documents. That's all fairly consistent between the jurisdictions that do have electronic databases. In this section of things, does anybody have any comments or things, particular experiences with this set of features that they think would be good to share with the group?
We learned an interesting one lately because we're having a lot of large commercial projects. So if you are in the process of setting up one of these systems, make sure you look at who your payment provider is. We choose to use a entity that Acela supports, but then they have a sub provider underneath that. And lo and behold, there's a $60,000 limit to process payments through there. And right now we're trying to push $100,000 and some odd $1,000 fees through there because SEC fees, and it's not working very well online. So make sure you always check that out because that ends up being a sticky point now that fees are getting so expensive across an entire city or jurisdiction. So that was an interesting one. One of the ones that you may want to look at in a bigger rule thing is the electrical permit rule requirements for the electrical contractor to pull their own permits. I know that has come up a couple times in discussions with BCD because we have the electrical rule that says that technically the electrician's supposed to be the permit holder, and then general practice, a lot of people end up being the applicant. We really care more about who the installer is. So if, as we move to an all online system, there may be more people inadvertently pulling the permit when technically by rule, the electrician was supposed to be the applicant. So just
yes, definitely. I think that's one of the things that we periodically at e-permitting. I know I hear about that question a fair amount and worth further discussion. Back to the question about the fees, though, and the credit cards and taking online payments. I know, just over the course of working with different jurisdictions on e-permitting and moving from two electronic systems for some jurisdictions, having to pay those credit card fees and knowing that those are going to be part of their business can be a significant one of those costs that needs to be anticipated. Just out of curiosity with the group here, is that something that jurisdictions have just built into your overall fee schedule? Or do you have other ways in which you recoup those costs?
So I can start with us. It was probably 3 years ago now, maybe 4 years ago. The city council actually looked at that as a holistic approach of should there be cost recovery on credit card fees, and they chose not to at that point in time and set it up as just it's a cost of doing business. So for us, when we do our cost analysis, we have to factor that in, assuming, especially now, the mass majority of our permits are done online, so there's some form of credit card fees.
And it sounds like for you, you don't have a limit on, some jurisdictions put a top limit on what they will take with a credit card because they haven't necessarily built those fees in, the credit card fees into their overall fee structure. But it sounds like you don't have a limit. You will take any size payment on the credit card.
Yeah, currently we don't. Our finance department just brought that up again as they're now having to get involved in these things. Even our almost used a name of a company we don't use, but our credit card service provider for at the counter has now, when they're that large of a number, actually wants documentation for, I guess, to deal with some additional fraud type concerns. So our finance department's getting more involved in. The finance director just brought that back up. Luckily, the two areas that most of those fees come from are enterprise type funds, so they're not generally affecting the general fund stuff. So at the current moment, they're not super worried about it, but I'm assuming it will be brought up again as, I can't remember what the statement was for this year, but it was tens of thousands of dollars of credit card fees. So it will probably start racking up again, and we'll be discussing it again.
Any other jurisdictions doing anything differently in terms of payments, online payments? Or have a different approach?
Not necessarily. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Not for the city of Portland. I wasn't going to speak to the fees. I was going to go back when we get a chance, when we were talking about who can pull the permit. And I just want to ask the group some questions, see if anybody else has run into a particular problem, if I can, when we go back to that.
Yeah,
well, the
definitely.
question, I apologize. I'm in the office today, so I have my mask on, so I apologize if I sound muted. The question we have in Portland is when we are having people pull online trade permits, we have a lot of people having problems pulling those permits because we have a particular matrix, if you will, that says if I'm a particular license holder, I am only allowed to pull this type of, say, electrical permit. I have to have my BCD, my signing supervisor, and whatever else. But a lot of customers say that they don't have that problem in other jurisdictions. Like other jurisdictions have opened up the floodgates with a little disclaimer, and then maybe a permit tech will check their license later. And Portland was just wondering how other people deal with that in this online rush that people want to get permits. Has anybody run into that problem?
So we did have that problem when I first started here. Basically, Acela was set up in two formats. We looked at it for CCB licensure and BCD licensure, and everybody was trained to apply only on their BCD licensure for trades. So it ended up causing a little bit of a hiccup because they may not have actually got their CCB one updated, and then they would, the system would throw errors at different setups. So we ended up, because of gleaning data from the two different agencies, it's not as great as you would hope, where we could just, get a push-pull type situation. Selena and I've had conversations in the past about begging for data. The reality is it's too hard to keep the two systems updated all the time. So we did have to fall back to just using the CCB as the gatekeeper for the actual who can make an application, but during the processing, staff finishes that. So similar to how the e-permitting site's set up, basically we don't give the permit over the online system. In reality, it's the next morning or whenever the permit techs finish the processing and then fully issue the permit. So if there's a CCB licensure issue, that's when we deal with that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, and with e-permitting, the way it works is that we do have all the, so for an electrical to pull an online electrical permit, not going into the office, because in the office, a permit tech can do whatever they want. It's on the individual jurisdiction's responsibility to check the licenses in the office. But online, you have to have an electrical contractor's license to be able to pull an electrical permit to get, because you do get it same day. But what we don't do is that that electrical permit is open to all electrical contractors, whether you have a limited energy contractor's license or a full contractor's license. And in that case, it's really up to that licensee. They're putting their license in jeopardy if they're doing work outside the scope of their license. And that's kind of where we've kind of walked that line between making it readily available and, you know, putting some responsibility on the licensees that they need to be, you know, if they have an electrical license, they need to be working within the scope of that. And jurisdictions can certainly double check it. So I don't know, does anybody else have, oh, go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
Well, Lisa and I have talked about this a few times, but we go ahead and, you know, we issue the permits as long as they have the signing supervisor license. And then if we come back, we check it every morning after our ACA permits come through, and we just verify that all those licenses are correct. And if they're incorrect, then we'll lock that permit until we get verification and validation that they are able to perform that work. So, but it is very time consuming. And as Jonathan was saying, some sort of way to link those all together would be helpful, I think, for all jurisdictions.
You meaning the electrical, the CCB, yeah.
And the BCD license. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, even for us, the CCB and the BCD aren't linked together, and that the two systems don't talk to each other. So any permitting, we load them each morning. So if a CCB's been inactivated and somebody's account's associated to it, you know, that's going to get flagged, but they don't speak to each other. So unfortunately, yeah.
Well, Selena, I, you know, to Matt's point, you know, if you guys, I didn't know you guys loaded every morning. So if you loaded every morning, maybe if we could get a pull every night, then everybody that's using Acela from your guys' system or self-hosted, we could then stay accurate pretty quickly. You know what I mean?
So I know that there, and every day, I know that it actually doesn't come through e-permitting, but our department does make our licensing system available on an FTP site every day. So you can get a daily load of the BCD licenses.
No, I was meaning and your CCB ones, since you guys already do that data dump. That would be cool.
And the CCB licenses as well.
Yeah.
I think actually that those are, so I think you can actually get both of them off of the same FTP, because it's, you know, where they're going is where our e-permitting load gets built from every day. And I think they're available at that spot also.
Okay, perfect. I'll talk to Richard. I know he's had some conversations with you, and then maybe an email to try to get that FTP.
Yeah, you can. If you give me, I'll reach out to you, and I can put you in touch with the person at our department who makes that available for folks. So
perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else have comments or experiences or things to share about the either paying online, or it sounds like licensing is, and checking licenses is still, there are some pain points about that process. I know we have pain points about the process, keeping up to date with like the signing supervisor stuff as well sometimes, or getting that load. It seems like that's one of the places that is a little bit of a barrier for folks in electronic systems, or something to be dealt with on a regular basis.
I'll just note that there's another problem between the BCD and CCB numbers, which is that they're two different numbering systems, and trying to align the two electronically, the names can be slightly different. And so it can be difficult to automatically line those up. And so that becomes a challenge sometimes.
Sure.
We pull the data, both of those sets of data from the FTP site, and our software, we try and automatically align those, but that doesn't always work out. So there's another opportunity for some future entity to improve things.
So, I mean, I take that if BCD and CCB could better align our systems and our numbering, I mean, I think it would be nice to be able to have a better sync up between those two sets of licenses. But then that's also a lot of work to keep, obviously, you know, a lot of resources, just like it's resources for you to keep all that stuff aligned. But yes, definitely something to look at. Any other comments or thoughts about online payments, uploading plans, or licensing? Any other online activities for customers?
So one other thing that I did at a previous employer's system, because we had some issues and some concerns, was one of the things that we had implemented, which was actually nice if anybody has that issue or concern, was when a tradesperson actually pulled the permit, they actually got an email that their license was associated with the permit. So that way, if for some reason somebody was especially, it's pretty easy to claim you're part of a licensed group in Acela when you're making your account. So if you were using somebody else's CCB number or whatever, the actual licensed professional got an email saying they're now part of that project. And it didn't come up often, but it helped, especially with the electrical contractors. They were very concerned of being named in a project that they weren't actually part of.
Yeah, I know from e-permitting that we periodically get those phone calls too. Sometimes it's a innocent mistake in that it's somebody who previously was a subcontractor, and then sometimes it's not an innocent mistake. The other thing is also to remind your customers, and we do it too, that they need to keep their email addresses up to date with the licensing bodies, with TCB and BCD, because otherwise they don't get those. You know what I mean? If somebody else is using their account and they don't have a valid email address on file with the licensing agency, they're not going to get that information. So, and we do periodically put that out to folks, but, doesn't hurt for everybody to get the word out and remind people of that. So, any other thoughts or experiences to share with the group? Alrighty, let's move on to the next chunk of stuff, inspections. All right, so we have some questions about what forms of inspection scheduling do jurisdictions use, and a lot of folks use a combination of online apps, texting, and automated voice. I know that's those are all the options that we have with e-permitting. And then some folks online voicemail in person, voicemail in person, and online only. So we had kind of a range of things there. Anybody have anything particular to share about inspection scheduling, difficulties getting folks to transition off of using voicemail or onto using some of the automated tools, or successes with that?
I know when we moved to quote unquote online only, since we are in the combination of everything, because when people call, we still take care of our customers. But the reality is when we moved to online only, the big challenge, obviously, and as at two different jurisdictions we made that switch, is just the huge amount of outreach and doing it. But it's really streamlining the process. When we moved on our side, we had probably 60 or 70 different inspection request type codes or numbers that could be used. And when we pared it back down, we dropped those by at least a third, if not half, because staff had internally made a whole bunch of inspections because it was easier for them than it was for the customer. So streamlining what you're actually looking at. Like at one point in time, we would have, just to look at a simple foundation inspection, technically it was 4 inspections, because we wanted to show that we looked at the setbacks. We wanted to show that we looked at the reinforcing and everything like that. So streamlining it for that. And I know part of the scope of this is consistency, I think is the way the legislature wrote it. That would be a good thing for BCD to help provide some guidance on a more unified what inspection types we're doing. Obviously the codes have theirs already predefined, maybe utilizing that, because we still today get a whole bunch of others, because even though it's very clear in our style of inspections what we're looking at, somebody else is, I do a setback inspection, so they call in other to do a setback inspection type thing. So having somewhat uniform naming would be helpful, I think, across all the jurisdictions.
I agree. I mean, with the permitting, I think that was one of the things that early on with some of our first jurisdictions, we had made gotten some agreements on what we called inspections. And then I think 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago, we also pared down. The same thing, we found that there were too many really specific ones, and when the list is really long, it's hard for the customers to go through and kind of figure out what exactly it is that they need. And I think the more that we as a state could, kind of make some agreements about the naming of those inspections, and then also, what falls under each particular one, some guidance of that or some consistency around that. I agree that would be, I think, very helpful for the contractors and for local jurisdictions and for all of us. So anybody else have any comments or thoughts about inspection scheduling?
So in Portland, one of the things that we ran into was the fact that if a design professional or an architect was the permit applicant and they applied for their permit online, then the contractor that they hired later would not be able to use the online system to be able to schedule the inspection. The contractor had to use our automated voice line because they were not the person who used their account to obtain the permit online. So that was an unintended kind of vortex we painted people into that we're trying to correct somehow.
Yeah, at least I'll say for e-permitting is that, we have some, controls over, like, not everybody can open plans. You have to be a registered person. But inspections are something we have completely unlocked in that anybody can schedule an inspection. In fact, you don't even have to register. But it's not a place we've not had of the, thousands and thousands of transactions that have gone through. I don't know of one instance where somebody scheduled, maliciously did some kind of scheduling of an inspection. We haven't really seen that happen. So, anybody else have different experiences or other comments about inspection scheduling?
I just said, in Eugene, we have an app that was developed so you can schedule on your smartphone, or you can log into your account and schedule online, or we still answer phones like Jonathan's shop, so you can still call. But I'm glad that you admitted what you just said, Selena, because I was hesitant to say that our inspection scheduling is entirely unlocked as well, because you don't want to say that out loud. But yeah, so anybody can schedule an inspection if they know the permit exists. But like you said, I'm not aware, and I don't know, Joel, if you're aware, but I'm not aware that we've had anything malicious or even innocently mistaken in terms of inspection requests. The closest that kind of comes to that is something that our inspectors struggle with a fair amount, is that, the general contractor on a big job will schedule inspections for the subs to be moving them along, right? When maybe the work isn't ready. So there's been some requests from our staff to have some method where only the person responsible somehow for the work is the one that requests the inspection, but we haven't chosen to go that direction yet.
That would seem difficult to manage, but I get the desire for it, but it does sound difficult. Anybody else have other experiences with inspection scheduling? Okay, next we kind of asked about how customers got their inspection results. Most jurisdictions have multiple ways that they might be communicating with their customers, including online, email, probably the number one way in which people, customers got their inspection results. Some had email only, few had paper only, and then a few said online only, that the customers were being directed to come in to check their inspection results online. So anybody have any insights on this or any pushback that people have gotten about different ways of communicating with their customers about inspection results?
This kind of goes with where Lisa was talking about. One of the challenges we had was that only the applicant would get the inspection results from the automated portion of the system. So what we ended up doing actually in both jurisdictions that I had worked for was actually setting up an inspection contact that the applicant now creates additional contacts that will get the inspection results, so that way they can disseminate it out further than just the applicant, because quite often, especially on commercial projects, it's the architect and they don't timely send the contractor the inspection results and stuff like that. But it's a SELA, so I won't say every, because sometimes it doesn't work the way we think it's going to, but the mass majority of ours gets sent out via email in addition to any other thing that the customer may ask for. And it honestly works great to give those that quick real time, as we're leaving the field, the contractor can be across town and know exactly what's happening. So I know you have a further down question on, should the rule be updated? I'll put that plug in there right now. Yes, the rule should be updated to at least say that we can do this, because it's a great thing. I think most contractors actually like having that ability. Quite often, it does replace our previous, hey, can you call me with my results type thing. So it helps.
We do, when people schedule inspections in Eugene, they have a little form they fill out. They have an account, they need an account to be able to schedule the inspection, although anyone with an account can schedule any inspection that's available in the system. But their account has their email address and phone number associated with it, but they can also specify, they can change those at that time, and they can also have a secondary email address and or phone number. And if they check a box, we'll send the results as a text message as soon as they're entered into the system. So the inspector in the field enters a result, and 5 minutes later, 3 minutes later, the contractor's phone beeps and they have their results there as well as in an email.
Nice.
And I was going to actually add, it's a combination between 6 and 7. We also implemented confirmation emails. So when they actually schedule, they get a confirmation email. That's actually a very helpful thing, especially when the system or somebody may have accidentally deleted an inspection request because they inadvertently did it or canceled it or something. So it's really nice to have those. So if you are setting up your system, you might consider that.
Anybody else have other inspection experiences, thoughts? I'll just say on e-permitting, I've been surprised. One of the things that we implemented a couple of years ago we've had the Selectron automated voice system for many years. And we implemented their select text scheduling, which I actually thought would take off a lot, speaking of texting, because it's pretty simple. You just text in and schedule it. And we've had some success with it, but it did not actually take off as much as I had expected that it would. I thought it would be a big hit with the contractors. But I guess you never know with some of the stuff, and maybe it's partly how it is or how we pushed it out to people that it didn't quite take off as much as it could have. So. Any other thoughts about inspection scheduling or results? Okay, then let's move on to the inspection technologies that inspectors are using when they're out in the field. It looks like we have quite a few jurisdictions where inspectors are using some kind of technology, either mobile app or a choice of, sometimes they're using a laptop, sometimes they're using a mobile app, or they're using their phones. And then we did have a few jurisdictions that must be working on paper when they're out in the field. Anybody have any thoughts about that, or any challenges or real successes with mobile inspection technologies? Nope. Okay. So the next questions, we have a few questions about video inspections. I know that there's been certainly a lot of interest in doing video inspections, and then COVID, I think, actually, pushed and forced some folks into trying out video inspections because of the circumstances. So it looks like, though, we had about a third of the respondents who were say that their jurisdiction does video inspections, and then proportionately 2/3 who do not do video inspections. And of those who are doing video inspections, it looks like a lot of people are using FaceTime and Skype. Some people were having customers attaching videos to emails, and then we had Blitz and View Specs. Anybody on the call have experience with video inspections, or want to provide any comments about their experience with it, or challenges, successes?
Here in the city of Portland, we do have the RVR program, which is primarily for our residential customers, and it's a residential video reinspection. That's the one that we primarily use for just reinspections of certain types of jobs. One of the things that we are wanting to do is to develop a list, a criteria, if you will, on how those video inspections are to be done. If you say, like, you have to, show us the outside of the structure with the address, the conditions, so on and so forth. But then the other issue is how do we retain that? And is there a requirement to archive that? So that's one of the questions that we have presented to our city attorney's office, and we haven't really gone any further than that. Just wanting to know what other jurisdictions do or think about those things as well.
Anybody else have similar experience or other experience? At least I can say go ahead.
Thanks. I would just say that we, like everybody during COVID, we're trying to stay out of people's houses and trying to incorporate video where we could, but it has to be a live interaction and kind of limited in scope, because some scopes of work, it's hard to do in that way, and we've had, I think, limited success doing it. But to Lisa's kind of record retention question, we don't accept recorded videos, partly because we want to be able to have that interaction with the person that's holding the camera to ask where they're pointing it and turn around and those sorts of things. But also, we don't want to have to have those recorded videos fall into a record retention schedule and have to archive them.
Anybody else? I can say with e-permitting, we've got kind of two different experiences. One is we're currently have just started up a pilot. We have an inspection app that we've been using, our mobile inspection app, our Oregon inspection app. And the app developers have developed a video inspection feature for it, which allows for both live video inspections and for uploading photos into a PDF to create an offline inspection kind of thing. And so, but I think kind of what was referenced there as to what is the scope of appropriate work is something that needs to be kind of worked out, or what criteria do you use for performing video inspections. I think it would be great if there was kind of some discussion amongst multiple jurisdictions. Perhaps we're going to be talking a little bit later about some work groups. I think it might be a good item for a work group to kind of discuss and thrash through some of what is appropriate for video inspections. We also did a pilot. We still have an ongoing pilot in our minor label program for mechanical minor labels using View Specs, a different app, View Specs app, where we asked the contractors to take photographs of of every installation they did on those mechanical minor labels, which we piloted in Marion County and Salem and around our Umatilla office. And I think, we definitely had some of the challenges in getting, you'd go out and do training with the contractors and provide materials to the contractors about what types of photographs you wanted for each of the installations. And there were only a few different types of installations allowed under those mechanical minor labels. And it was still pretty challenging to get the types of photos that were necessary to be able to do a good inspection. So I think that that type of, photograph only definitely presents its own type of challenges and would be worth kind of having some discussion about what would work and what wouldn't work for those types of inspections. So, anybody else have any experience or thoughts about video inspections or what's appropriate to them? And obviously archiving seems like one of the questions if you're going to take, certainly if you're going to take pre-recorded videos or, have photos, whether you need to archive those and for how long is certainly something that would need to be worked out. But anybody have other thoughts about that or any of that?
I guess just more a question. The way BCD is interpreting the legislative thing, is video inspection going to be part of that remote inspection context out of the bill?
You mean of a comparable system, or what needs to be part of it? I think that's going to be part of future discussions as to what, I think we're in the information gathering side of things at this point in time between, what's everybody doing, a baseline of what are jurisdictions doing, then kind of some talking to contractors or surveying of contractors to get a sense of what their needs or wants are from electronic systems. And then there'll be a process of discussing it. It seems to me that videos are a new enough thing that it would be difficult to expect that everybody be on board that quickly to do that. It seems like there's a lot to be worked out in terms of, what constitutes, what should be the scope of those and what is the appropriate technology for that. But it would seem, a little bit soon to be saying everybody should be doing that. Until you kind of have some of those things worked out. But again, for future discussion.
Okay. I know a good resource, it would be Jim Muir, since, he's been doing it for quite a few years for Clark County, Washington. So if for the video inspection, so I'd reach out to him.
Great. Thank you for providing that. Anybody else? Any other thoughts about video inspections? Okay, let's kind of scroll down the list here. And we did ask folks what concerns they had about providing video inspections or doing that. And, again, pretty similar types of things to what we've discussed is just kind of, the technology, the equipment, the archiving requirements, also some thought that there could be more opportunity for fraud on the part of the contractors potentially, in that you wouldn't be able to see where you were, and also just not being able to see the complete context of the installation when you're doing video inspections. So yeah, definitely some things to be looked at as we look to moving forward with some types of video inspections. And obviously connection and reliability. I know certainly working with some of the counties, you just can't expect to have cell phone connection every place. And if you're going to schedule a video inspection and the contractor gets out there and there's not signal, what's going to be plan B, so that it doesn't become counterproductive to be expecting to be able to do a video inspection and then you find you can't do it. So, alrighty. Then we asked some questions. Just before we move on from inspections, anybody have any last comments about any part of the inspection process? Alrighty, let's move on to then data questions. So we asked here, the next few sections, we just asked, a couple of quick questions. How many jurisdictions are publishing their building department data for people to search? And it looks like fair numbers weren't, but or are. And some said no, although I do think maybe people were thinking about this question a little bit differently, and that if you have an electronic system and people can search it, then it is in effect kind of published. But I think maybe people were thinking of this in a more, maybe in a more packaged sense of like, do you have your stats online? I don't know if that's how people were thinking about that, because the numbers are a little bit different between those two sets of questions. And then we asked a question about how folks assembled their data in response to public records requests. And it sounds like for the most part, people have to either on paper or in email or in person request the data. And then it sounds like it's fairly labor intensive for most jurisdictions to have to kind of go through and gather up that data and then provide it back in a package to the customers. Does anybody have any thoughts or responses to these questions here? Or any particular issues that people have had in terms of making data available? I know in e-permitting that's been writing reports to some types of frequently requested data. We have some of those big organizations that request data on a regular basis. Is that something that other jurisdictions have, is that one way that people have dealt with it? Or do you just kind of have people go to the website and pull the data themselves?
So we don't do a lot of pre-published reports. We do for the counties. I think that's the only ones we have currently. But my previous employer one, we did used to get a lot of those requests. And what we did was just through reporting, just set it up for a subscription service. So that way we could just have those types of general data already sent out to the specific interested parties, whether it was the HVAs or, CD data or whatever it is. They could just glean that report, and then it got published on the website too.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Other experience? Alrighty. Let's see. Let's move on then. Integration. We asked some questions about how much jurisdictions' electronic databases integrated with other software or with other systems at cities or counties. And it sounds like for quite a few jurisdictions, their building and their planning data is integrated so that they can see across them. It looks like fewer agencies have a direct integration with the financial or accounting software. So there's some other type of methodology for getting information between the two systems. Also, comparably, relatively fewer jurisdictions have document management systems. And if they do, a number of them do have integrations to the building database, or it's the same. Either the document management is the archiving system. So, anybody have any experiences with integrations or thoughts about either the benefits or downsides or of doing integrations or having integrated systems?
I would say there's positive upsides to having as much integration as you possibly can, because we spend, I don't know, probably 20 minutes each morning reconciling Acela with our financial system, which is not fun by any means. And, it varies by place. Here we have to manually enter it. previous employer, it was a data push. We just audited it, made sure it was right, pressed a button, and voila, everything worked fine. The finance department's not okay with that here, so we have to manually enter it every time. Integration definitely is good in that sense if you can, especially with your other departments. Planning doesn't use Acela as much as we do in any format, so we're always the ones that come up with the cool new thing to do. But they slowly bring on, and it's great because they we have one software for people to now apply on. For us, it's Public Works, planning, and building. So it's the customer just sees one interface instead of everybody having different things. So from a customer's perspective, it's great.
Anybody else? Other experiences? I know in e-permitting, we have a lot of jurisdictions that have both building and planning, code enforcement, sometimes public works, and for those jurisdictions where they can have that integration for whatever reasons, they generally appreciate being able to have the access to the data, and the customers often appreciate also having that single platform to go to. And we've seen all kinds of different ways in which everybody's finance department and their relationships between community development finance are very different in different places. So we've seen a lot of different ways in which that integration happens. And yeah, it can be challenging, and the more it can be streamlined, it's certainly the better it works out for everybody. But, any other thoughts about integration or? Alrighty, let's move on. I think we're at the kind of our final thing, which was we just kind of asked, what are the barriers to being fully electronic in jurisdictions? And obviously we got all kinds of comments in there, but definitely money costs, both again staff and equipment costs were one big thing that was mentioned. Another one is just human interactions, whether that was that a jurisdiction is loath to adopt fully electronic because they want to have that face-to-face contact with their customers, or the flip side of it being that some places feel that their customers don't so much want to have to do things online, or would prefer to have those face-to-face contacts rather than being forced to do things online, or having that option. Some thoughts about again kind of the some issues of potentially the technology affects that by taking away that human contact, that you have more opportunities for fraud, or for for people to cheat the system because you don't have a face to put to the application or to the signature. Some concerns about that. And then, and I see some of these are certainly about e-permitting or about other systems. I think there is the question of, like, how do you keep, with electronic systems, we're always balancing, the cost of the system, the maintenance of the system, with the flexibility of the system. And how do you keep the usability, but also make it so that that you can afford to do that, and that you can maintain, the levels of stuff. And so I think that's an ongoing challenge with technology, and technology also changes quickly, and we need to keep on top of those changes and upgrades, which means, again, consistent, those resources that have to be assigned to doing that. So I think that is definitely one of those barriers or ongoing challenges that we have with using technology to do these processes. Anybody, have any comments or things that they saw out of the list of barriers that they wanted to kind of add on to or discuss?
One of the things that that comes up a lot here in Portland is that if things are so complicated, people just won't get a permit and they'll just do it anyway. And we're trying to figure out how to do that balance of providing a system that's pretty user friendly and balancing those needs of our citizens that aren't tech savvy in order to get them through the process as well. And I think the biggest thing is also staff trying to embrace change has been really difficult. That's been a huge one.
Agree. And I think that one of the things that we can look at doing with this rulemaking is see if there are places where our own rules are kind of hindering the ability to make a user-friendly system. And because I think that is definitely one of the challenges to building an electronic system for a regulatory program, is that you have to build in all of those pieces of regulation, and regulations aren't always made with the thought of what that's going to mean to do it electronically, right? So that is one thing that I think we can try to do with this rulemaking committee, is see if there are some places where there are things that are getting in the way of making those processes, straightforward. I think a couple of people already brought up, the challenges of licensing and the fact that there's all the licensure. How do we make that a little bit easier for using in electronic systems? And if there are other things that we can come up with that we know, and we're going to discuss some of them when we're talking about some of the work groups, I think that will help with that. Any other thoughts in terms of barriers or things that you saw in people's responses as barriers?
Well, I think, especially reading through a lot of the comments, obviously the money's definitely always going to be an issue, and the customer interactions definitely a huge concern that we all have to work on and be concerned with. One of the balancing acts that we chose to take is, our lobby used to be busy with customers all the time. Now, not so much because COVID, but people have moved to online. We get a lot of customers that like the fact that they don't have to come down, but we always have that onset of somebody that wants to come down. Even though we went all online, what we did initially for our lobby and are potentially going to do more is we're actually putting kiosk computers in, and then staff will actually go help them at the counter actually complete the application together. So to deal with some of the security issues that our IT department wants, because they don't want us to put have a customer's jump drive and install it into a network computer and those sorts of things. So we're creating that. We're here to help you. We're here to walk you through that process. They're still going to get the same type of customer service. Now, it's unfortunately, instead of helping you fill out a paper application, it's come over to the computer. That way I make sure that, your email is correct and everything like that, because that used to be a huge problem trying to decipher someone's handwriting. So it's just switching up how we do our business to still be customer friendly, but provide that now electronic era approach.
Anybody else have other experience or thoughts? Well, I'd say also the flip side to that, in terms of customers, is there's both, there are definitely folks who don't want to have to do things online, right? Who would prefer to do paper or, prefer to talk to a person. But then there's also a growing expectation from some folks that things are available to be done online. And that is a balancing act of, some people want to have those services and, are very, kind of surprised if they can't do it in a technological way, whereas other people are completely on the other end of the spectrum. And how do you accommodate all of that with limited resources? So, any other thoughts? I think we've covered then the survey. I wonder if we want to take, I think that's taking a little, maybe a 5-minute break before we launch into our next discussion. Does that sound? I'm taking that as a yes. Nobody says no.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
All right, let's go ahead and let's take a little bit of a break, and we'll come back. It looks at like, 5 after 3. Maybe 10 after. How's that sound? Let's do 10 after 3 then.
go. I think it's time to get started again. So, Selena, are you all finished with issue number 1, I think, for now? Excellent. I think that was a great discussion of the survey results, and a lot of really good information came out from that. We really appreciate it. So if you want to look down on your agendas to issue number 2, that would be providing hard copy electronic inspection reports. So this is one of the areas that we were looking at as part of this electronic processes discussion. And it's the only area today where we're going to be asking for a recommendation from the committee today. So essentially OAR 918-020-00908D requires a building inspection program to leave a written copy of an inspection report on site. And based on the survey results that we received from various jurisdictions, certain of them are using mobile inspection technology. And we as a division would like feedback on whether or not the rule should be updated, or the committee recommends the rule be updated to allow a building inspection program to either leave a written copy of the inspection report on site or provide electronic access. So it's an either or option. And essentially what we would like feedback from the committee is, does that expansion of options create any problems? Is it helpful? Where does the committee feel like the division should go on this issue?
Go ahead, Matt.
Go, Mark.
I'll start. Yeah, I mean, I'll second Jonathan's earlier motion that the rule get modernized. It wasn't that long ago that the building code required plans to be submitted on substantial paper or cloth, and we got past that. You said, Tyler, when you first introduced this question, you said hard copy. We currently do not comply with that across the board. And if push came to shove, I would argue that the OAR actually says we need to leave a written copy, and we provide a written copy of the inspection reports, correction memo, whatever's involved in that. And it's left wherever the person who's identified to receive that information happens to be. If they're on site, it's with them on site. If they're in their vehicle or their office, it's there as well. So it's all kind of how you define the terms. If you leave somebody a fortune, it doesn't mean that there's a pile of money in one specific location. So I would argue, if I had to, and hopefully I don't, that we leave a written copy on site now. It just happens to be electronic. But I think the rule definitely needs to be changed to clarify that and bring it into the modern world, because there's so many better ways to communicate now than a carbon triplicate left on a clipboard or stuffed in a tube on a job site.
And I would agree with that. I'll just add a little anecdote that we had laser printers in our vehicles for our inspectors, so they could, if somebody requested a hard copy, we could leave those printed out for them. And eventually people just took them out and nobody asked for that. So I think the electronic, I think it's fine if we want to leave a hard copy, but I don't think it should be mandatory that we do so.
This is Cheryl, Douglas County. I wanted to also ask that on that requirement, the electrical program aligns with the building. So I think our electrical inspectors are the only ones with printers in the car, and they have to leave a paper copy. And anyways, it's not as popular.
We also do not leave a paper copy. We are completely email. The only time, if we have an elderly person that does not want an email copy and would like a hard copy, then we mail them one so that they can have a copy. And that's the only time we ever get any pushback on that, is sometimes we have some folks that aren't as savvy with email and they want a hard copy, and we always offer to mail them a hard copy, and they're more than fine with that.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. That's a similar approach we took. Mark and I share similar approaches of that. Just add a little shelter just in case enforcement decided to say I wasn't in compliance with the rule. We did actually put an opt-in, opt-out clause on our application, so that way if you wanted a hard copy, you could check a box and we'd deliver a hard copy for you. So, but all of ours is electronic, and we don't hardly get any customers that want a paper copy. The few is what Samantha talked about, somebody that either doesn't have an email address or just would prefer a paper one. And that's what we do, is we just have our general customer service email be the email person on that. And if our customer service box gets it, we know to print one off and mail it out to the person.
Excellent. Do we have any other comments on the issue?
I guess I would ask whether we want to say something in the rule that, you know, we've had some questions from a couple of jurisdictions saying they want to go absolutely completely electronic, as in, you know, nothing would ever be on paper. Do we think that it's important to say that if, you know, if somebody requests it, they can still have a paper copy? Or do we want to leave it more flexible?
My only concern with that is if, you know, we have an inspector, you know, out in the field, you know, we're up at Timberline or something and somebody wants a paper copy, there's really no way to get that to them quickly if they had to go back to the office and print it and bring it back up to them, you know, even the following day, or if we mailed it to them. I just see there's complications in that. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, especially working through some other things that I'm working through with our local political side. I know they would like to have a little bit more local input on situations. So, you know, I don't know if we even need to address that in the rule, because obviously if my policymakers say, hey, we're hearing from constituents, we want that option, we're going to provide that option. So, you know, we can leave it to a little bit more of a local to decide if they need to provide one based on their customers' interactions.
Our inspectors still carry the 3-part ones in their car. So if somebody really wants paper, they can write it out and then follow up with an email with, you know, the refined notes with code sections, that kind of thing. But they just carry the paper in the car just in case somebody does want a paper one.
So it sounds like to me, if I'm understanding everyone correctly, that there is some disagreement as to whether or not it should be, you know, the individual should have the option of being able to receive a paper copy. Is that accurate?
I think they should have the right to receive one, but I don't know if we need to put it in the rule to say that we as a jurisdiction have to do it. It seems like that's a locally administered programs decision type thing through our little bit of administrative chapters changes we get to make.
I would agree with that. I think, you know, if obviously if our, you know, customers in the county really needed something in writing, we would find a way to get it to them, but I just don't know how quickly that would be. You know, it might be a day or two lag between that if we didn't have printers in the cars. But again, you know, looking at all the technology things and the costs, you know, to put a printer in every vehicle to print, you know, one inspection result out, you know, a month or maybe every 6 months or a year is a pretty expensive endeavor for something that's not being used.
I tend to agree with what Matt said. And also we do send them an email. And then for the people who do want something in writing, we do also have the little 3-part, you know, printed paper inspection reports, as we call them, that customers can use. But I like the idea of kind of keeping it at a local level. If there are We could not equip, I think in the inspections division, if I remember correctly, we have, I want to say 48 cars, and then we have a compliance section that has about 20 cars, and to equip all of those with printers. And then of course we live in the city where there could be a smash and grab at any point in time. We would be replacing those every day.
Thank you for your feedback. Anyone else?
Just say, it seems like the intent of that rule is that the results of the inspection be communicated promptly after the inspection. I think that's the intent of having, originally having a written copy of the report being left on site when the inspector leaves, is so that you have that, reasonably prompt information about the results of the inspection. And that's probably, I think that's what the rule probably should say, is that the communication needs to happen. I don't think it should dictate the form.
So you'd be saying that instead that it be written not even to address at all, just that inspection results must be promptly made available, kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the intent. I don't know if that's, I don't know how to wordsmith it right here, but I think that should be the focus, right? Because that's really the service that I think the customers want. Like others have said, I'm not aware that we have much of a demand for a piece of paper in their hands. I think what they want is they want to know the results as soon as we're done.
And I would agree with some of the other people who said they have the forms, the old written forms that, I think any jurisdiction could provide something like that, right off the bat, and then follow up with an email or maybe a mailed, typed out one that they could potentially read better, especially if it's my handwriting.
Yeah, I would say, and our tech team is very attentive to data integrity, and I am as well. But if you have somebody write a handwritten note on a triplicate form and also type their observations into a mobile inspector application, those aren't going to necessarily be the same. And you have two different records of the same thing. So that's just we're trying to build our system to avoid that exact thing. We want to have one documentation and one record that everybody has the exact same thing and it's retained.
And if I may ask, generally, what is the delay between the inspection and the emailing, say, of that inspection report on average?
I think it really depends on the different situations and complexity of the project, especially given the write it and cite it rules. Quite often, sometimes you'll end up having to go back and look at something in the code book in more detail. But generally, like our expectation for most things, especially simple approves and stuff like that, it's before you leave the job site, you're already resulting it. But so that it's instantaneous as soon as the system gets it. The challenge is, in certain areas, fortunately, we don't have as much of them, but bad data areas, those sorts of things, there's some delay in the system actually getting it. Or if it's an extremely busy day, you may choose to postpone resulting it officially until you get back to the office or have some downtime because you already promised the next person you're going to be there at 10 o'clock type thing. So in all cases, for us at least, they're resulted either by the end of the day or first thing the next morning at the furthest outside.
I would camp onto that and say the same thing. We're a large county, and then we have some pretty rural areas. So you may be out of service for several hours and then come back in, or say that presses you up against that 4 o'clock quitting time. It might be the next morning that the inspectors get the results in.
For Portland, we are resulting pretty much immediately, at least by the end of their workday, because if not, it then gets thrown into a non-resulted bin that a supervisor looks at the end of the day, which is also our checks and balances as a safety issue to make sure that that inspector is okay and completed their day. since we are working remotely.
Ours is the same way. We result them usually by end of day. Sometimes it's the next morning, but usually by end of day. As far as getting if we have to send a paper out, I will usually send that one right away, and I send it to both whoever the contact is on the permit, and then I send it to my building at MilwaukeeOregon.gov inbox, and then I shoot my permit tech text and just say, "Can you please send this out via mail?" The mail may go out the next day, so they may not get their hard copy for a couple days. But I haven't had any of the contractors where it's a sensitive issue are not the ones that are wanting paper. It's the ones that just want it for their records, that they don't care if it's 2 or 3 days out before they get a hard copy.
And is that consistent with everyone else's experience, that there's not really any demand for an immediate paper copy, as it were? Whether you are sending those emails immediately, there's nobody demanding on site immediately a paper copy?
That's correct.
Correct. Not a paper copy. While they're on site, if they're on site, they want to know the results, but not a paper copy.
Okay. So it's my understanding, and I'm a lay lawyer, so please go easy on me, but the first option that we listed here under the first bullet point of this issue, it gives the option to the jurisdiction, the inspection program, to either leave a written copy on site or provide electronic access, whether that be an email or whether it be some sort of hosting for the jurisdiction, if that's one option. And is that sort of sounds like the approach that most individuals here want us to take, where it gives the option to the building inspection program itself. That also doesn't drastically alter the rule itself, which, as an agency lawyer, that's always a nice thing for us. But it seems like it gives them the flexibility to not have to leave some sort of written copy, not have to necessarily have a truck equipped with a printer to leave it on site that moment, but still sort of follow their general practices of, emailing it as soon as possible. And then if there's a paper copy requested, I mean, that's up to the jurisdictions to then send out as they will. And I can't imagine that any of you are denying those requests and saying no paper copies whatsoever. Does that sound like the option that is amenable to the things that you folks have been saying?
Yep.
Okay. All right, well then, Selena, do you have anything else on this issue?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of follow up kind of on what Mark had said. So is that more like structuring the rule so that it says that an inspection result should be posted within 24 hours? Because it sounds like some people may not get to them, that the outer limits is the next morning, right? So an inspection result should be posted within 24 hours and then maybe mailed at customer request or something like that? Or you like the way it's structured, which just says you can do it electronically or send it by paper?
I would vote for the latter.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that seems generally like the consensus of the committee. Is there anyone that disagrees with the recommendation of the committee being that first option there? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, well then we will document that as the recommendation of the committee, unless I hear otherwise via email or a phone call of some sort. But in any case, I think it is best for us to move on to issue number 3 on your agenda. So as you'll notice, we broke these into 2 different discussion items, and Selena, please feel free to jump in if I miss anything. But first off of these 2 discussion items, these are sort of longer term process questions that we have. We're trying to get additional information from stakeholders, and part of that effort is forming several different work groups that we are looking at to discuss a discrete issue. So, this committee has discussed a decent number of issues so far in the 2 meetings. We're trying to hone down on more discrete individual issues For example, certain forms are required to be collected by building departments, whether or not that is something that should continue. Handoffs between utilities as far as harmonizing electronic processes. And if this work group has, or if this committee has any other recommended work groups that it thinks would be helpful to discuss various issues surrounding electronic processes, we certainly be open to those as well.
I'll just add on to what Tyler said. So in our first meeting, we had a number of representatives from Northwest Natural, and they had kind of, we reached out to see, what their interest was in participating in this rulemaking committee, and they were interested, them and also PGE, in kind of discussing and seeing if there's some way that some electronic processes could improve the handoffs or the green tag processes. And so we basically just asked them, well, what is it, what does that process look like? And so they were going to be kind of documenting the processes from their side of things, or from their point of view of what it is that the utility companies do and would like to see. And they were going to get back to us by February sometime with not just the straightforward processes, but some of the exceptions to the rules of, like, the little kind of, usually it's this, but 10% of the time it's this, so that we could really get a picture. And then we were thinking that this would be something that would be good to have a work group with local jurisdictions and maybe a contractor for their point of view, to see if there are some ways that we could use electronic processes to make things move a little bit more smoothly in those overlaps between utilities and building departments. Is that any thoughts about participating in a work group like that, or what the process for that would look like for that?
I definitely think that some form of work group for that type of matter is needed, and maybe even more than just the utilities, because I know one of the ones that we still struggle with, and most jurisdictions as we move electronic will struggle with, is like OSBIL's requirement for verifiable signatures, those sorts of things, and a lot of the systems have trouble with that. So working with the other interested parties through a work group session would be good, and probably a couple different ones, so that way we can work through specific targets.
And I don't think Tyler mentioned it, but I think electronic plan review, based upon the survey results and what you just mentioned in terms of things like signatures, I think that would probably be another good work group to have, is to some discussions about what, and this one more to looking towards the future of, like, what would be baseline expectations for what a jurisdiction would offer for electronic plan review, because that's not, obviously for permitting systems, we had fairly consistent results in terms of permits and inspections, but electronic plan review, there's still a lot more flux and a lot more variety between what different jurisdictions are doing. And so I think it would be a place where it'd be useful potentially to have some discussions about, what should that look like, or what are the expectations that folks have, and what do customers expect about electronic plan review? Are there some best practices that should be, made statewide? Are there barriers? Certainly cost and things were identified, but the issues like, can you make those plans available? Are there copyright issues, the electronic signature issues? I think all of that stuff could go into a decision, a discussion of that. So. And I'll just pipe in one more thing before, which is the other thing that Tyler mentioned was the form. So I know I've heard from a couple of e-permitting jurisdictions that the energy efficiency forms and the moisture content forms that are required to be collected are something that are difficult for jurisdictions to collect electronically. I'm sure it's not just electronically, but that you're often chasing the contractors down after the permit's been issued to try to capture those forms. And so it might be useful to have a work group to discuss some better ways of doing that, or collecting the data, or whether the data needs to be collected, or whether there's another way to do that process, because it sounds like that is an impediment to streamlining and making a straightforward process for jurisdictions doing permitting. So those were 3 thoughts. Did anybody ever have other thoughts of things that would be appropriate to discuss in a work group that would be worth breaking down and having some more kind of concerted discussions, because you need to get into the weeds and the details to really kind of figure out what should be the best policy moving forward?
I think the licensing would also be another topic that might be worth exploring. I think we're all struggling with that. And if we had some sort of uniform way every jurisdiction did that, it would be helpful for the states. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good one too. Other thoughts?
Doesn't need a work group, but just Tyler to put it on the agenda for maybe the next meeting. Getting rid of the fax machine requirement in the rule.
I thought we were going to do that.
I think we discussed that briefly in the last meeting, but that if there's more discussion to be had there, let's definitely have that.
Yeah, I thought we actually agreed to strike. Well, I know we agreed to strike the telegraph requirement, but I thought there was some agreement we could get rid of a requirement for fax machines through rule, to strike those from the rules. I think we did.
As long as you guys come out with the rules saying that we're happy.
Okay. Other thoughts, other things that come to mind for a work group?
Well, I think separate work group would be what BCD / the industry and us as the regulatory side feel the remote inspections are supposed to encompass in the legislative language.
You mean the video type inspections?
Yeah, the video or photo or whatever the group decides is the virtual / remote inspections.
Yeah, I think that's a good one too.
Because I heard from a few people, because we also joined the mechanical pilot program, and one of our mechanical contractors was rather vocal, so I pushed him to Warren, but was rather vocal that they didn't like video and they thought the photo thing is challenging, so they chose not to do it anymore because of that. So we're going to need our industry partners to be on board with whatever we come up with.
Agreed. Although I do think that the fact that that was minor labels makes it different than, if you were doing another type of installation.
I agree. Sadly, like Mark's point, it almost makes it should have been easier to do minor label to a point, because it's somewhat of a fixed installation where, like if truly the expectation at some point in post 2025 is we're doing framing inspections by video, that's a lot more challenging to say, hey, I need you to do this and this and this and this.
So any other thoughts on work groups? I think we were thinking that we would then kind of package up the work groups that were suggested by this group and send out an email to the entire committee, asking for if there are additional ideas also for work groups, and asking which groups people would be interested in participating in, and also hoping that you would forward the work group suggestions to other people who might be interested or might be appropriate to participate in any of the particular committees or groups that we have set up. Anything additional, Tyler?
Nothing for me.
And I think I'll move us on to the last, we've been so long meeting here. The last item to discuss was the contractor survey, or we had originally called it a contractor. Maybe it would be a public survey, because it's not, I don't think it's all contractors. I think we got great participation and really good information from local jurisdiction as a baseline of kind of what people are doing and where we're at with that. I think it's going to be a little bit more challenging to figure out how to reach out to the industry and what questions to ask, partly because it's not just one industry, right? We have architects and engineers that participate in the plan review process, but maybe are not as involved in permitting and inspections. You have some contractors, you know, some of the trade contractors who don't do that much with plan review and maybe are primarily interested on the inspection side of things. So trying to figure out, you know, who are we asking questions of, and what questions do we need to glean from them in terms of both, you know, kind of trying to figure out what technologies are being used, what technologies people want, and kind of how they interact with them. And I think it might be useful to have some discussion about, and maybe again some smaller, well, I don't know. So let's throw that out to the group. Do you think that we should have a meeting as a whole group to discuss and do kind of what we did with the jurisdictional survey? We kind of talked through and figured out what questions we wanted to ask and kind of how to do that. Do we want to do that as a whole group to look at doing an industry survey, or do we think that it would be more useful to break that down into, you know, having a work group discuss, you know, putting together the industry survey?
It seems like their industry needs to be broken down into different groups, because those are kind of different surveys. I think if you're going to engage AIA, for example, that would look different than what you might ask NECA or the trades, or
yeah.
And some of you in the group probably have a better idea of everything that, all the interests of the proponents of the bill in the first place, and I'm not privy to you know, really the problems that were intended to be solved by this. So I don't know how best to engage, because even the design community, a lot of folks work locally or semi-locally. They don't have, you know, they don't have experience with a lot of different processes and systems necessarily. You have people that work primarily in Eugene or in our area or in the metro area, or, so it's hard. I think you'd have to craft the survey in a way that it would try to get at themes without specific responses to specific experiences.
Yeah, I would wonder, I mean, I wonder if it's two surveys. There's one about plan review processes, which is more about the design community, or maybe it's not just plan review, it's the whole upfront approval process, you know, which can go beyond plan review. And then the second side of it is more the permit and inspection side of things. And that maybe is a different group of people. And then how do you engage, who are you going to survey in each of those groups? And how do we engage those people, I guess, is my thought of kind of probably where we need to go with the surveys. But I don't know if any other thoughts about that. And I agree, it shouldn't be specific. How do you keep it away from, you know, this system, we didn't like this and this about this system. How do we talk more about what their needs are from systems in general, or, you know, what they, you know, what are the things that are most important to them in terms of their bottom line of doing business, I guess.
Sure. And, you know, a lot of the kind of the reasons not to do it and the concerns and things that were identified in the survey have to do with kind of one-time customers, homeowners, people who just, they don't want to learn a process, learn systems. They don't want to deal with technology. So that kind of customer type was brought up quite a bit in the feedback, but I don't know how you tap them. Like, I don't know how you get that customer's opinion.
Well, I mean, that is true. It's you know, how I totally understand, just as a citizen, the idea of like, you have to go learn this complicated system for the one time you're going to do this thing. And, you know, I get it. I feel the pain when I take help desk calls from people who are in that boat. That is a hard line. But then, but then they are the one-off, right? Compared to the contractors or the design people who are using the system all the time and for whom it is a big benefit. So, yeah, and I don't know how you would reach those homeowners or those individuals to gauge what would help them. So, but that's something we could, anybody have any ideas about that, or any other thoughts about how to structure a survey or surveys to kind of gauge customer stakeholder needs?
I like the idea of breaking it up into the, trades inspection portion and then a plan review. I think there's two different needs that need to be met there. I do think it's challenging trying to, survey, homeowners versus contractors and their experiences, and also just in the different geographical areas as well, you're going to have different outcomes. So that's kind of a big lift. So I think, a group to maybe discuss that and, look into different options might be a good way to, at least start it off and see if it's something that, somebody could tackle that work. So.
For the one-off customers, I don't know some of the jurisdictions that are already currently using electronic process. Do they have surveys of, a customer satisfaction survey after they use the site that maybe you can draw what the customers value or don't value from those systems? Maybe it's just food for thought.
Maybe I can speak for, sorry, that always happens on these video meetings. We went optional with our online or our paperless process in 2015, mandatory in 2017. And since that point, we haven't done a survey. I would point Cheryl. We need to, we've been talking about it, and I think it got sidetracked a little bit with the pandemic and everything, but that's something we're intending to do. We're also making a big investment, huge investment, in redoing our homegrown permitting and plan review and inspection system. And we're at the point now where we're going to go out and get external stakeholder feedback. We haven't had really a developed new product enough to engage people with, but we're going to be doing that soon too. So I'm really interested to, we make a lot of assumptions, and I think most of them are probably pretty accurate because it's kind of common sense about a lot of things that our customers want, but it's not something that we do a good enough or as good a job as we could with asking and checking those assumptions.
I was going to chime in on the outreach to those other industry partners. It may be wise to leverage some of the boards, since each board already has the makeup that we're looking at, so most of them have a design professional on there. Most of them have tradespeople. So, relying on the board for some of those questions might actually be a good, quicker option, since we already have them who agreed to help BCD out.
So I guess I would ask one kind of follow-up of the committee. I've heard a couple of people say, but it sounds like it may make sense to think about having two different surveys, one for the design professionals or one for the front-end process, and then one for the permitting inspection. Does anybody not, see any downsides to that, except that it's more work, but apart from that?
No, I think it makes total sense to do the separate ones, because really the processes are unique and different in that aspect of them. And, even throughout your guys' rules, that's the way it's set up. Do all this for the plan review, do all this for the inspection. So running them separate would be the best. We get the best results that way.
And then I think kind of following up with what you were saying is maybe it would make sense for the division to kind of reach out to some of the stakeholder groups that are affected by both of those categories and see if we can gather some participants to have a discussion, potentially fold it into this group to talk through what things we should be asking for both of those?
Yeah, I think that would be the best solution, especially previously working for a trade association. It is a great asset to utilize those tools, because we then could have reached out to our constituents and see what they wanted and what questions they may want asked. So I think that's an appropriate way.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts about that? That's definitely, I think I imagine, it seems like next steps first will be kind of looking at the work groups that we discussed, sending out an email, engaging interest and participation in some of the work groups for some of the topics that we, plan review, video inspections that we discussed a little bit ago, and then probably a little bit longer term is starting to reach out to the different stakeholder groups to put together maybe 2 meetings, one to discuss a survey about design review and electronic plan review survey for the industry, and another one about permitting and inspections for the industry, and that those would be kind of our steps. And then obviously we've approved changes to the inspection rules in terms of hard copy and removing fax requirements. So those are definitely also new next steps for the division to take. I think, Tyler, you think, have we covered everything?
I think that's a pretty good summary.
All righty, anybody have any last thoughts? Thank you for participating in, I think, what was a really productive meeting, and especially on a lovely sunny day in January. It's not always that easy to sit through a long meeting, but we appreciate it. I think it was quite useful, and we have some good things to move forward with.
And I will say we will also be in touch regarding these work groups. And if you or anyone you know would be interested in participating in those, please forward that information to either Selena or I. As we go forward, we'll continue having these meetings, and we will continue to gather more information. So if you're interested in still participating, we really appreciate it, and we would like feedback from anyone we can get it from.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be involved. This was a good discussion.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.